Good afternoon, everybody. This is a live tropical update, and today we have a ton to discuss. We have Hurricane Isaias out there that has been impacting portions of the Bahamian Islands already. It's located just to the north of Cuba. Definitely an interesting structure with the system so far this morning. I'm going to be looking at the 360-degree view here on Radar Omega to kind of show you the vertical structure of this hurricane. But just here, looking at the 2D imagery, you can certainly see an overshooting top and some towers that are going up to minus 80 degrees Celsius there. Those are some of those really hot towers that we talk about so often, those supercell storms that are embedded within the inner core of this hurricane that enhance that latent heat release and help to drop those surface pressures and intensify this storm. But so far, Hurricane Isaias has been battling some southwesterly wind shear, just a little bit of southwesterly wind shear here as it's approaching the western Bahamas and getting passing to the north of Cuba. It's also been pulling in some dry air off of the higher terrain of Cuba and Hispaniola earlier today. There is quite a bit of dry air that also lies out ahead of this system. That's also getting entrained into the circulation just a little bit. And a little bit of that southwest to northeast oriented deep layer shear. That's causing a bit of a tilt from the low-level circulation up to the mid-level circulation. They're not quite perfectly vertically stacked, and in fact, this center has been exposed at times this morning, but this is a convective explosion here. You can definitely see the mid-level center with this as well, and using these tools to tilt and look at the 360, you can definitely see the inner core of this hurricane. And when I looked at it this morning, the core was even a little bit more compact. It has expanded just a little bit. You can definitely see that overshooting top right on the east side of that mid-level circulation as well. And this 360-degree tools here are a great way to see just how healthy that inner core of the hurricane is. But one thing that you can't see with this, with the infrared satellite image is where the low-level center is located, and that's what we're going to use the visible satellite imagery for, just to see if there is a little bit of a tilt with this system. And there is just a bit of a tilt because of that modest wind shear out of the southwest to northeast. That causes just a very subtle tilt from the surface low pressure up to the low pressure at the mid and high levels of the troposphere. Hurricanes, to really undergo maximum intensification or to be purely healthy, they want to be perfectly vertically stacked from the low levels up to aloft and behave like a heat engine, transporting that heat from the ocean surface up to aloft in the atmosphere. The whole entire role of hurricanes is really to transport heat from the equator and from the low levels of the atmosphere into the upper levels of the troposphere and then up toward the poles. They definitely play a huge role in heat transport. And that's exactly what's happening here with Hurricane Isaias. The latest advisory from the Hurricane Center shows that the pressure has risen a little bit due to hurricane reconnaissance aircraft data. Looks like that central pressure is up to about 992 millibars. The maximum sustained winds are at 75 miles an hour, so it is a minimal Category 1 storm. And the latest models have also trended just a little bit west with time with this system, a little bit closer to Florida, and that is why a hurricane watch has been issued for the east coast of Florida, and I'm going to be breaking that down as well. I'm trying to decide whether to intercept this system in Florida or if I should just commit 100% to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. The official hurricane track does have a Category 1 hurricane approaching the Outer Banks on Monday, but it also has a Category 1 hurricane getting very, very close to the east central coast of Florida Sunday morning, Saturday night. That's when conditions are really going to start deteriorating there in Florida. And here's the visible satellite imagery, and you can see those low clouds on the to the west of that deeper convection. You can see a big mass of convection, though, over the entire eastern half of the circulation, and then the western half of the circulation is completely void of that convection, but you can see the low-level clouds, which indicate the position of that low-level center. And it looks like you can almost see the very western side of that low-level center, just on the west side of that convection. But you can see that convective blob on the east side of that low-level center, but you can almost see the tilt here. You can see at the low levels where that low-level circulation is, and then you can see the mid-level circulation aloft, tilting from southwest to northeast because of that deep layer shear. And we're going to break down break down the maps as well of the upper levels and show you where that wind shear is located. We're going to forecast that wind shear out along the track of Hurricane Isaias. But based on this and the way that this storm system is already behaving, with even just modest amounts of southwest and northeasterly wind shear and a little bit of dry air already pulling in, I could see Hurricane Isaias being steady state or even weakening just a little bit on approach to Florida. I could also see it getting more vertically oriented overnight tonight and then intensifying on approach to Nassau and some of the western Bahamas and eventually to the east coast of Florida. And in fact, this thing certainly could make landfall in East Florida as well. So that's why a hurricane watch has been issued, and there certainly could be dangerous conditions arriving in East Central Florida. And confidence is very high, and at least maximum sustained winds approaching 75 miles an hour and a dangerous storm surge as this makes a pretty close pass to Florida. Here you can see those hurricane warnings that are in place from the east coast of Florida here, definitely including Miami all the way up to the Cape Canaveral area there. Those are the hurricane watches, not hurricane warnings right now, but that's because Hurricane Isaias is expected to make a very close pass to the east coast of Florida as it's beginning that curve off to the northwest. And now I want to show you the official hurricane track. I always want to start off with that, and you can see a classic recurvature, but there has been a shift in that forecast track westward, a little bit closer to the coast of Florida. So that's definitely concerning that it is moving that close to Florida. The models, the GFS, the European, the global models are all shifting closer to Florida, and that's why the hurricane track has shifted west as well. And it makes it that very close pass to the east coast of Florida on Saturday night into Sunday morning. And the forward speed is also expected to accelerate during the day on Sunday as it gets picked up by that trough that's arriving from the west. That could lead to severe weather on Sunday across portions of the mid-Atlantic. And right now, the official track has a Category 1 Hurricane Isaias passing very close to the North Carolina Outer Banks over Cape Fear there, but a pretty large cone showing you that even a recurvature is possible. Even a track a little bit further inland, like a Matthew type of a track, scraping up right along the coast, causing major coastal erosion issues, dangerous storm surge conditions, dangerous winds as well. But right now, the track does have it as a Category 1 the entire time. The last advisory had Hurricane Isaias intensifying into a Category 2 on approach to even Nassau there, where it's going to be very close to Nassau in about 24 hours. I was looking at traveling into the Bahamas, but saw that all commercial flights into the nation there are not happening due to the coronavirus. We are looking closely, though, at structures and shelters out on the Outer Banks, out near Hatteras, some elevated structures to really cover that storm surge and the approach of this potentially dangerous hurricane. Some of the hurricane intensity forecasts actually show a bit of an intensification on approach to North Carolina. Especially the European model. That even shows the hurricane intensifying into a pretty stout Category 1 storm on approach there, likely as it gets over the very warm waters of the Gulf Stream, and as the forward speed accelerates in the exact same direction as that southwest to northeast oriented shear. There could be a period where you get a reduction of the storm relative wind shear as it's lifting off to the northeast toward the North Carolina Outer Banks. And there you can see these hurricane warnings through basically all the Bahamas there. And then you can see the pink, the hurricane watch. You can see some tropical storm warnings as well. And the maximum sustained winds have been decreased slightly down to 75 miles an hour. And here's the forecast wind shear for tomorrow morning. And you could definitely, this is the 200 millibar winds. I just wanted to look at a GFS forecast raw plot of those 200 millibar winds. And then we can look at a forecast sounding and also assess the storm relative wind shear. But look at these southwesterlies out ahead of the hurricane at 200 millibars, which is in the upper troposphere. This stronger flow here likely has a subtropical connection as well. You can see the anticyclone directly over the system. That's why we have such a favorable outflow pattern, at least over the deeper convection over the eastern half of this system. But it is exposed over the western half, especially in the low levels, and there is a tilt from the low-level center into the mid-level center, and that's because of these stout southwesterlies, 30 to 40 knots out here out of the southwest. And I do think that as this trough approaches from the west, I don't see a reduction in the southwest and northeast oriented shear, but in terms of a storm relative sense, with this storm recurving to the northeast toward the North Carolina Outer Banks, there is a decent chance of a reduction of that storm relative wind shear as it's getting picked up by this trough, which is going to be responsible for severe weather across portions of the mid-Atlantic on Sunday. But it's this wind shear that has prevented Isaias from undergoing rapid intensification. Last night it looked like there was a chance that a compact core could really intensify dramatically, but this wind shear out of the southwest to the northeast has just been a little bit too much of a mitigating factor to really blow up that wind shear, or to really intensify the inner core and for the bottom to drop out and for that storm system to undergo rapid intensification. So here is a area average sounding, and this is produced by a storm chaser friend of mine. Jim Tang generated this, and there you can see that wind shear, and this is actually an under-representation of the wind shear that we were just analyzing there on the GFS. This even shows just a little bit less, at least in the area average sense, but you can see still winds in the upper troposphere around 200 millibars are up out of the southwest and northeast at 20 knots, probably a little bit more just ahead of this hurricane as well, as we were looking at the forecast for Saturday morning. This is a little bit later in the day. Then you have these easterlies at the low levels in an area average sense, creating bulk shear in excess of 30 knots that the storm system is being subjected to. And that's likely why this system is going to remain more of a Category 1, maybe a Category 2 storm as it moves through the western Bahamas, flirting with the east coast of Florida, before recurving and heading toward the North Carolina Outer Banks. So here are the updated hurricane models. These are the global models and the hurricane model forecast track right along the western side of that Bermuda High, and also ahead of a trough that's going to be picking up this storm and lifting it off to the northeast with time. And then I'm going to show you the intensity forecast. But there has been a western shift in these tracks, getting a little bit closer to the coast of Florida. And in fact, some of these other outliers are a little bit further east. And that's expected, given a slightly weaker storm. If it continued to intensify last night and was stronger this morning, then we likely would have a more poleward track. But with a slightly weaker, more disorganized storm with that slightly exposed western side of the low-level circulation and a little bit of a tilt, that's leading to a more western track. And so that's one thing with a slightly weaker storm. It should have a further western track closer to Florida. With a stronger storm right now, it's going to have a more poleward track. But either way, there's going to be impacts on the east coast of Florida, and you need to be prepared for those impacts. Potentially dangerous winds, dangerous storm surge. And then this is going to turn off to the northeast and potentially impact portions of the Outer Banks on Sunday, and even New England, maybe as a slightly subtropical or a hybrid storm getting picked up by that trough, but there's definitely going to be some strong winds, rain, stormy conditions up there in portions of New England and eventually up toward Nova Scotia as well before this thing heads east across the northern Atlantic to the north of that Bermuda High, eventually heading toward the United Kingdom, blasting past Iceland as well. But I need to decide whether I'm going to be heading to Florida to intercept this close pass and then blast up the coast, getting to the Outer Banks in time, or do I just head straight to the Outer Banks and then I don't have to mess with the ferry closures. I can get out there, set up shop in advance to battle that potentially dangerous storm surge there in the Outer Banks. So a lot of decisions to be made here as this thing turns to the north and eventually to the northeast around the western periphery of that Bermuda High. Here are the intensity forecasts with, interestingly, the European, or EUCMET model there is showing the stronger secondary intensification on approach to the North Carolina Outer Banks. And I do slightly believe that that solution, because when the storm system turns off to the northeast, the storm relative shear should decrease just a bit. And so it is possible that this storm system could still intensify after the recurvature, as it's heading toward the North Carolina Outer Banks. Some of the other models don't really support a stronger secondary peak in that intensity, but the European just kind of shows a very gradual intensification, initially impeded by the southwest and northeast oriented storm relative shear, but then as the storm turns off to the northeast, that's why this model in particular shows the secondary peak on approach to the North Carolina Outer Banks, an even stronger storm than when it makes that initial approach over the northern Bahamas or to the east coast of Florida, and then a dramatic downturn in the intensity as it transitions to extratropical beyond about 100 hours out, 120 hours or so. But the official forecast intensity from this morning that had it reaching a category 2 was definitely on the strong side of many of those models forecasting the intensity here. So now I want to show you a quick visible image. Well, we just looked at that one. So this is the latest Hurricane Hunter aircraft, and this was the data that resulted in that slight decrease in the maximum sustained winds to 75 miles an hour, a slight increase in the minimum pressure to 992 millibars based on that extrapolated pressure. This was a recon mission of the low levels of the hurricane. Not surprisingly, it did find most of the strongest winds in the east side of the center, but definitely see some pretty strong easterlies there to the north side, but those flight level winds measured at 70 knots extrapolate to a maximum sustained wind near the surface at about 75 miles an hour, which is what the National Hurricane Center Advisory adjusted that to. And they did make multiple passes through the mid-level center of that of Hurricane Isaias here. Not as much of a recon mission here over the low-level center, but again, they're flying up a little bit higher, so definitely wanted to sample the wind speeds in that most intense inner core of the hurricane, despite that slight tilt from the low-level center up to the mid-level center aloft. And here's a plot showing that pass right through the center, and that's what resulted in that adjusted minimum pressure up to 992 millibars, showing just a slight disorganization or a slightly less organized system than it was last night when a compact inner core was really intensifying. The pressure dropped, maximum sustained winds were up to 80 miles an hour, and it was named a hurricane last night. Then there was a little bit of a minimum in the convection. It was wrapping in some dry air into the center. And since that time, as we're going into early afternoon, it does look like the convection near and just on the east side of the center is definitely ramping up, as we saw in that 360 degree, or in that 3D satellite imagery from Radar Omega. So let's go back to that again, the satellite imagery, and we'll break down this thing in 360 again. And then I'll check your questions as well. But you could definitely see this convection right over the center really blowing up, and that's the inner core of the hurricane. And when you look at it in 3D, you can see that it's a lot higher as well. And it does look like that convection is getting a little bit closer to the main center. So that could show that it's going to try to make another attempt at an intensification, but it definitely does have a very compact inner core. It's interesting how this thing went from being a very large, sprawled out tropical wave to a compact tropical cyclone. You may remember as we were following this thing from the beginning, I would have thought that this would have been a much larger storm, but then interacting with the topography, some mid-level centers taking over, it's become quite a compact tropical cyclone as it's approaching the western Bahamas here. So now let's look at this thing in 3D again. There you can see that inner core. Zoom in on it, and you can even see the overshooting top there. Wish my mouse would show up in this live stream. But there you can see the inner core, the outflow pattern as well. You can see those gravity waves in the outflow pattern, transverse banding there, showing that this convection is a really intense convection that's exciting a lot of gravity waves in the outflow pattern aloft above that hurricane. So it does look like to me it is intensifying now finally as we're going into early to mid-afternoon. After that brief lull, it looks like the convection near and pretty close to the center is definitely starting to take over. And the convection off to the east, you can see is, let's look at the 3D so that we can see the tops of the inner core. And there you can see that core of the hurricane that was really compact this morning when we looked at it as it was battling that dry air, appears to be expanding and becoming more robust. So I think that this system is beginning to intensify as it's approaching Nassau, probably less than 24 hours now. It'll be over Nassau and still heading to the northwest on approach to the east coast of Florida, where those hurricane watches have been issued. So really what this is going to come down to is it going to make a close enough pass to Florida to justify my intercept down there, potentially at the expense of getting out to the outer banks of North Carolina, or do I just commit to the outer banks of North Carolina and put a lot of faith into the European model? But it does look like this system is getting more vertically oriented as this inner core and the convection associated with it seem to be propagating over the low-level center. And a more vertically stacked tropical system is a healthier tropical system. So this is definitely a concern for the east coast of Florida as this continues to move off to the northwest. So I'm going to make my final decision during the models tonight on how to chase this storm. I wouldn't mind being in Nassau right now, out ahead of it. But we're going to be meeting up with Mike Tice and the HERV out there, setting up the Windy Palms project, mounting wind monitors on palm trees and other obstacles like bridges, that kind of thing. The infrasound sensor is going to be ready next week, so I think that's going to be in time for the next tropical system that comes along. But here we've got Isaias coming close to the east coast of Florida. Hurricane watches are issued there, so if you live in Florida, I would expect a very dangerous storm, even though it probably is going to be a Cat 1 hurricane on its closest approach, maybe even a little bit stronger. But definitely want to plan for the worst conditions. You definitely want to not be caught off guard when conditions actually do deteriorate, because it looks like that's exactly what's going to happen across the east coast of Florida. So I hope you guys enjoy my weather reports. Stay tuned, and I'll be streaming live from the field as well. Thank you, Facebook supporters, for making Team Dominator research possible, live storm chasing possible, getting out there and storm chasing. And that's what I'm going to continue to do. I'm going to continue with these daily briefings here. Hopefully they're educational. They'll get more on the educational side once we have a little bit of a breather in between these storms. And once we get a little bit closer to the winter, this winter will be pure meteorology, case studies, tropical meteorology, and severe weather, and winter storms and synoptics. So thank you everybody for joining me, and I'll let you know what our plan is later on tonight. But it's either east coast of Florida or the North Carolina Outer Banks, or both. Maybe we just chase it up the coast as it undergoes that recurvature.